My name is Chaplain Claude Crisp. This is my 9/11 story. On September the 11th, 2001, I was working in Washington, D.C. at Arlington National Cemetery. On the day the Pentagon was hit, I was actually at Bethesda Medical Center tending to my son who had had surgery when a corpsman walked into our room and said, "You need to turn the TV on. Something big is happening in New York." And so we turned the TV on, and the story began to unfold what was happening at the Twin Towers. And a few moments later, the newscaster cut in and said, "We have breaking news from Washington, D.C. It appears that something similar to what has happened at the World Trade Center has happened at the Pentagon." And so within a few moments, they began, of course, to speculate what had happened at the Pentagon. At Bethesda Medical Center, things began to unfold really quickly because whatever had happened at the Pentagon, though it had not yet been identified, was surely going to be significant. And so they locked the hospital down for a brief period of time, and then they asked for blood donors to go to a certain location in the hospital in anticipation of needing blood donors. So I left my son in the care of the corpsman and went to the location where the blood donors were asked to go. And just within a few minutes of the net call going out, there were so many people lined up to give blood that it was literally lined out the door of the hospital. And it was an amazing scene. The folks that were attending the floor where my son was, of course, immediately went into a scaled down staff while others prepared to go to the emergency room, expecting that many of the military would be brought there. Eventually, of course, most of them were taken to closer hospitals, and very few were brought to Bethesda. But it was amazing to see the staff, how they reacted, how calm they were, how quick they were to be prepared for whatever the 9/11 contingency operations might be. A day or so later, I returned to work at Arlington National Cemetery, and for the first time was able to look across Highway 127 and saw the incredible damage done to the Pentagon. There were still, of course, emergency vehicles all over the place, the lights still flashing, the building was still smoldering. They were still working in that section of the Pentagon, but it had ceased to be rescue. It was now recovery. The anticipation of anyone being alive was pretty much gone. One of the unique scenes from across the road there is you could see up on the hill where the Air Force Memorial now stands a large contingency of folks. Many of them were family members whose loved ones were still missing, and they were waiting, hoping against hope, but still waiting. And they waited through the days, through the nights. Some of them never left until they had received some kind of formal word what had actually happened to their families. From my perspective as a chaplain, looking across, knowing that I was working at Arlington National Cemetery, knowing that we would be involved in whatever happened, it became a matter of just waiting through the days till the funeral homes began to release to us our soldiers so that we could provide for them the military honors, which I conducted the first of the Army funerals at Arlington National Cemetery. It was a young major who was married, had young children, and I will never forget when I met them for the first time to prepare for this funeral, how strong they were. I met their young teenage daughter who just had an incredible faith. She had such a positive personality, and she just assured me, we're going to get through this. We're going to be just fine. And as I watched them, this family, encourage others, it made me really realize how strong and indomitable the spirit of the American soldier and their families are, especially our spouses and our children. They are prepared for the worst. They survive the worst. They do amazing things. And so 9/11 brought to me particularly a visibility of families, not only from those who stood on the hillside that day and for weeks, but also those who showed up at the cemetery for the funerals. They were incredible people. made you proud to be a part of the Army family, knowing that our Army families are some of the strongest people in the world. And I've grown to appreciate Army families greater because of 9/11 than ever before. And I've also grown to appreciate the people who love the military, who stand by us no matter what happens, especially after 9/11. It was very obvious they cared a great deal about everyone. And it made you proud to be a part of the military family. And that's my 9/11 story. The city of Washington, D.C. came to a screeching halt. It was a silent city all of a sudden, which was sobering. As I stepped out on the cemetery a day or so later, and they no longer allowed air traffic, so the air traffic that normally flew into Reagan National was no longer there, and so it was silent. The cemetery was silent. And it just made me think about how 9/11 impacted our nation. It made us all pause and listen. For the first time, we didn't hear things we once had heard. The hustle and bustle of Washington, D.C. was just no longer there. We heard some sirens. We heard the cries of people for the first time who had not cried in a long time. We heard people calling for help. We heard the silent voices of those who were there to lend support. So 9/11 changed my perspective in that it made me realize as our lives unfold, tomorrow is not promised. And if it can happen in Washington, D.C., if it can happen to the Pentagon, it can happen anywhere.
Is there anything else you'd like to say, sir?
I think I would say this, that I have greater pride being a soldier because of what our soldiers have endured, how quickly our soldiers prepared themselves for the future, for post 9/11, realizing that something terrible had happened. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about somehow changing our world back to a dominant American force throughout the world. It was about justice, and it was about keeping hope alive in America. And American soldiers were ready for that.